18, wetland creation and restoration, is a really fun thing to do. It's not necessarily technical, and it's really kind of a cookbook approach. The most important thing, I think, to know about constructing wetlands is the first non-italicized part of your book. And it says, in case you don't have it in front of you, there are 2 general starting points for anyone interested in getting involved in wetland restoration and creation. Number 1, learn wetland science and its principles first. So you all did that. Number 2, broaden your horizons. This is funny, I was laughing. Broaden your horizons beyond the field that you were trained in, so that you resist the ever-present temptation to over-engineer, over-botanize, over-zoologize the wetlands that you create and restore. Which is really funny because in teaching this, when you have an engineer in the class, they're going to do all these ponds, and there's going to be pumps, and there's going to be all kinds of cool waterfalls and systems. And when you have a botanist in here, we're going to do 17 different rare and species, and we're going to do these wetland plants, and they get really planty about it. So this is a new addition from the previous version of the book, and it is just, I thought that was hysterical to see that. So it is true, and it is the case that it is super important to not, sorry, I'm moving my computer around too, to not over-engineer your system and to not use your training biases to make these wetlands. They are very, very simple. You hope that they're simple. They are easy to construct, and it's really kind of a cookbook. Your book has a cookbooky approach, and these slides are not really redundant with the book, so I don't want to just sit and read you the book. But it is really the case that they're easy to make. You could go out and make one right now. So this homework 7, that you're constructing one in your hometown, you really could go out and construct one. Case in point, I told you about this before when I taught this at Northeastern. The Westwood Tea Station was being constructed, and there was a wetland, that little piece of a wetland they needed to destroy. I told you about it, sort of sloped parking lot. And the Conservation Commission told the developer, you have to mitigate. So you have to make 4 times the wetland that you're destroying, and you have to involve a college course in the reconstruction of the wetland. So I had a bunch of undergrads who were not, some of them were majors, but they were not graduate students. They had no formal training. We went out, we put on some boots and some safety vests and hats, and we actually rerouted a river to flatten it out, which was very easy to do. Dump some sediment, get some shovels. It was a little river. It wasn't like the Mississippi. And we planted wetland material. We regraded it. We did this all ourselves. And we did this about 10 years ago. I should put some pictures up. Pictures of Westwood. And I just went back there a couple of weeks ago, and Westwood. And it was really neat to see that the wetland that we created is thriving. It looks beautiful. It looks great. And so there's nothing terribly difficult about this. So let's sort of move on with looking at how you do it. Feedback. Ew. Okay, sorry. Okay. So with regards to functions of wetlands, can somebody either type or unmute and say some of the functions of wetland? We've been talking about these all semester. Excellent. Yep. Habitat, wastewater treatment, flood control. Excellent. Storm surge mitigation. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people wrote habitat. Excellent. So yeah, those are the things that wetlands do for us. And so, yep, trapping sediment, improving water. Oh, you guys are so awesome. Oh my God, I want to tear up. So yes, absolutely. They look cool. Very, very cool. Yeah. So, so these are the things that we like wetlands for. I see people are still typing. Excellent. Yeah, they do. They look cool. They do. And so, especially this picture, right? And so this is why we would create a wetland. So the history of constructed wetlands, essentially, kind of in a nutshell, German scientists constructed basins with macrophytes, so that's seaweed and plant, to purify wastewater. And in the 1970s, US researchers also examined natural wetlands to treat wastewater. So that's one of the first uses that we had, to treat water, to treat wastewater. It used to be the case, actually, we used to dump wastewater into existing wetlands because we knew, this was before the legal protection of wetlands, but we knew that these wetlands were able to filter water. So they're called nature's kidneys. Remember, kidneys of the earth? And they have been called that for a long time. So we used to just dump sewage and dump things into these wetlands, knowing that the wetlands would take care of it. And then later we started to construct wetlands, and we built them really to mimic natural wetlands, though they're not part of the natural system. So they can either have surface flow, so you have standing water most of the year, and in some cases if you have a pitch on the landscape or you have a pump, then water will flow through. And then we also have, as you'll see, subsurface flow. So you dump in some sand or gravel mostly, and water will flow through that porous substrate and then will support wetland plants, macrophytes. So here's a picture of a constructed wetland. They can be very simple as plugging a drainage area. So here you plug a drainage area, the water backs up, and you have a wetland. They can also be very complex, as it turns out. And I can't stress enough, it's not always a good idea to over-engineer. That said, I'm going to show you how you can engineer these systems to maximize on what you want them to do, and I'll show you some data that shows how the engineered systems actually are better at doing specific things, some things, than just plugging a drainage ditch. So it depends on what you want to do, but you do have to understand very well the ecology and the hydrology of the system, as this simple wetland shows. Feedback awful. All right. So a couple of early studies in the University of Michigan in the 1970s, they dumped up to 5,000 cubic meters per day of secondarily treated wastewater into a fen. So secondarily treated means they took the sludge out and they took out the sediment. So what's left over as you go into tertiary stages? Ammonia? Are you guys hearing this? Am I think I'm logged on twice. Okay. Athena, yeah, you hear the strange sounds too. It looks like I am on here twice. Let me look on my other computer. Sorry about this. No, I'm not on. Let me see. I'm gonna really sorry. Let's see. I don't see me. Awful. Yeah, Athena, I just shut off mine. Yeah, maybe, George, I'm going to mute you if you don't mind. Or if you can mute your own. But that shouldn't be the case, that you guys are causing this. So, Athena, can you mute yours? Right. All right. You can hear now? Oh, okay. Okay, George. Ha! It's George's fault. Yes. You can hear me though, okay now, right? George, no problem at all. So anyway, so we'll go back to the early studies. University of Michigan, they were dumping up to 5,000 cubic meters per day of secondarily treated stuff, so it was high in nitrogen, and it lowered total nitrogen, it lowered dissolved phosphorus. Yeah, thank you. But chlorine didn't change. So that should make sense to you because these are plants that are lowering the materials, and plants, as you know, these macrophytes are using nitrogen and phosphorus. They're not using chlorine. So there are only some things that will be taken out. University of Florida, also in the early 70s, secondarily treated wastewater was added to cypress domes at about 2.5 centimeters per week. So that's a lot of water. It lowered nutrients. It also, in this case, lowered heavy metals, microbes, and viruses. And then while doing so, productivity actually increased. That should make sense because if there's still sediment in the water, the microbes and viruses, 98% of them are sorbed onto the sediment. So when you're getting the sediment to dump down into the cypress domes, you are removing the metals that are sorbed on and also the microbes and the viruses. And because of the increase in nutrients, the productivity increased, so it's taking more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So really neat stuff. Max Planck Institute in Germany, this is back in the 50s. What they did was to create a gravel bed and then macrophytes, so aquatic plants. And in the 50s in Germany, they reduced, let's see, bacteria, they reduced inorganic and organic chemicals, and this is such a success story in Germany that it led to constructed wetlands pretty much all across Europe because of the new interest in, sorry, looking at these books, new interest in making sure water is clean. So next one, the reasons, as you guys said, these are the reasons, right? We've been talking about this all semester. These are the things that wetlands can, or sorry, creating a wetland can do for us. We do them primarily for water quality and for mitigating loss. Peatland here, by peatland I mean peatland restoration, so restoring a peatland. So mitigation just means replacing the wetlands, and you hope their functions. It's required if the Army Corps of Engineers is involved, and if alternative siting can't be done for whatever it is that you're doing. Banking, so banking is like mitigating, but you're creating artificial wetlands as a sort of credit system. You maybe know you're going to destroy wetlands somewhere else in the future, so you bank them, you make them right now, and then you can destroy some in the future. And then a treatment wetland is a wetland that's created specifically for treating waste, whether it's agricultural waste. There's a lot in your book about agricultural restoration of wetlands and agricultural runoff, whether it's storm runoff, domestic wastewater. I'll show you a couple of cool things with acid mine drainage in around coal mines. So those are treatment wetlands. So those are the three main types: treatment wetlands, banking, and mitigation. And here's a picture of just a simple wetland that is being created. The water's going in, and you have some algae. There's this mud algae, mud phytoplankton, that can take up some things. And then you have the soils underlying this. If it's a really permeable area, you might put some geotextile in to make sure the water stays at the surface. If it's not, throw some crushed stone in there. And you can see the things that are going on is that the plants are undergoing their biotransformations, as we talked about the second week in class, and there's sediment that's coming in perhaps from this dirty water, from this polluted water, that will accumulate in the wetland. Plants will take up certain things, and then microbes, remember microbes are governing a lot of the reactions here, will cause the different nutrients to go away or to go into a gas phase. And then by the time you get to water outflow, the water is much purer. That last thing right there, sediment recovery, the up and out. If you're putting a lot of stuff in here and it's bad, you would dredge this and you would put it into a hazardous waste landfill or some sort of landfill so that it can continue to function as it has been functioning, that you don't fill it up so it becomes a terrestrial landmass. And those of you who are local, when I just took the Salt Marsh trip today with the undergrad students, there is a quarry in Quincy that is they're all done quarrying it. Oh, sorry, Roxbury. They're all done quarrying it, and the people that own it want to dump a bunch of water and also waste materials, construction debris, etc., into that quarry in West Roxbury and turn it into a wetland or cap it, but they're getting a lot of opposition from the neighbors. So the pros of these are that they are less expensive, much less expensive potentially, and by that I mean in terms of construction, operation, and maintenance. So if you build a wastewater treatment plant versus building a wetland, you are in a very good situation. They can tolerate flow fluctuations a lot better than a conventional wastewater treatment plant can. I always give Cape Cod as the example here. Cape Cod, numbers escape me. I think it's something like 60,000 people live on Cape Cod in the winter, and that number swells to 300,000. Don't quote me on this, but the range is right in the summer. And so a lot of those places are still on septic systems because you have to design a wastewater treatment plant for a certain volume of water. If you design it for 60,000, which is the winter population on the Cape, then all summer the wastewater treatment plant is going to be overflowing and discharging raw human sewage into the fragile bays. If you design it for 300,000 so that it can handle the capacity of the Cape in the summer, then for all of the winter you have to pour huge amounts of water in to get the waste that's going in to process. So it's a difficult situation. You need to have an exact number of gallons of water that's going in. But in a wetland, you can have a lot of fluctuations, especially if you use facultative plant species, so they can tolerate fluctuations. They facilitate water reuse and recycling versus, like in Hingham, let's see, Cohasset, a lot of those places, when they have a wastewater treatment plant, they are sewering it out of the basins, called interbasin transfer. So they get their water from rivers or lakes or streams or wetlands in their basin. They treat the used water and sewer it out of the system. And so that leads to water crises. So water recycling is important. As you all said, right, provides habitat and enhances wetlands are fun to look at, cool to look at, what Jim said. They enhance the aesthetics and the functions of the landscape. So some of the disadvantages are that they require much larger land areas than a conventional wastewater treatment plant. The performance is variable. You should have an intuitive understanding of this, right? Think about putting in a wastewater treatment plant in Florida versus putting one in let's say, northern Canada, right? The plants are what are doing the treating, and the plants are not growing and photosynthesizing in the middle of a northern Canada winter. So the performance is variable based on temperature, based on floods, based on snowmelt. And when you have the seasonal variation, like we do in Boston, then you would expect it to only be seasonally productive. Sometimes if you overload it, the plants can all die. It's called shock load. It's toxic to plants. The plants all die. You have to go replant them, and you have to find something to do with the water while you're replanting. It does require a minimum amount of water. It is a wetland, right? And so there needs to be some sort of water there. So the wetland types by source, you have municipal wastewater, which is human sewage. You have mine drainage, acid mine drainage, which means that water that comes in has a low pH, especially if it is coal mine. There will be really high iron, high sulfate, high aluminum, trace metals. So this is toxic kind of stuff that's coming out of a mine. Stormwater non-point source, in that case you'd have seasonal, sporadic, variable flows. You're just trying to flood control, right? Landfill leachate, you collect and treat the runoff from lined landfills to reduce things like ammonia, phosphorus. Turns out landfills, municipal landfills, not much bad in there, so you can use wetlands to treat the leachate from there. And then agricultural wastewater, especially wastewater from concentrating animal feeding operation called CAFOs. So the excrement of the animals, right? We have broken the food system so that plants are grown in one farm and the animals are raised on another farm. Creates massive amounts of waste. So those are the types of things that we would treat with a wetland. In terms of how to define your goals, what is it that you're trying to do? And this is to get you around over-engineering. If you're just trying to treat for tertiary wastewater from a human wastewater treatment plant, you don't need to do a whole bunch of stuff with dredging, with pumping, with all that kind of stuff. You may have to do that if you're using it for a CAFO, for an animal feeding operation. select your site. You guys are going to do this in your project. George, you've already done it, right? So select your site, excavate if you need to, introduce your vegetation, and really that's it. So the design, you design these to integrate the natural processes as much as possible. So when you're looking at hydrology, that's the basis, as you remember from the first day, for biological and chemical conditions. So you have to look at the hydroperiod. I'll show you a picture of hydroperiod in, I think, a couple of slides. And that's simply the seasonal pattern of the water in a wetland. It's the hydrologic signature of that particular wetland. You can look at the depth, you look at seasonal pulses when you have high and low, and then hydraulic loading. Optimum detention time for municipal wastewater is between 5 and 14 days. That's enough time to let the plant take up the nitrogen and phosphorus. It's also enough time for municipal waste, for viruses and bacteria that are sorbed to the sediment to settle out into the wetland. So this is from your book. This is just a picture of water level fluctuations in a wetland in Ohio. This is a constructed wetland, and so what they're looking at is where the water level is, and you see two things going on. They shut down the weir so they could change some things. They wanted the weir to be a little higher, and then they stopped data collecting back in '98. But you can see that there's this hydro period where you have high, low, spring, fall. Let's see. So site selection, and this is from a regulatory point of view. If you're doing it upland, you don't need permits for inputs, and it's preferred for treatment wetlands. If you're doing it in lowland, you need permits required. You need permits for the inputs. It's also easier in lowland area to restore degraded wetlands, and that can result in a net environmental benefit. Also, we have to worry about public perceptions. In Cambridge, they've done a couple of constructed wetlands for treatment, and they put in a nature center, an interpretive center, and they do all this stuff so that the public thinks, wow, this is a great wetland, and they become stewards of the wetland. The role in the watershed, by that I mean water quality, wildlife corridors, hydrologic considerations, and then these other things. It's important to take these things into account when you are constructing your wetland. So an example for methods, here we have the constructed wetland totally square. You have quarter-acre ponds. They're 125 feet long, they're 85 feet wide, and they're 4 feet deep. And you see some bubbling going on. Sometimes you want to have an aerator in there for the plants. The plants are Sagittaria lentifolia, so duck potato, and they were individually planted at half-foot centers in here. And then there were other plants, free-floating vegetation, that were laid on top. So on top you have free-floating macrophyte systems, so water hyacinth, duckweed. Then you have emergent macrophytes, so Phragmites, my favorite, right, and Typha, cattail. And then submerged macrophytes, and then you can also do forested, you can also do multi-species algal systems. So think about what it is you're trying to accomplish, and in your cookbook style, figure out which one of these things will protect your, or accomplish your goals. What are your objectives? You do want to maximize species diversity here, minimize any sort of weedy, non-indigenous invasive species, so kind of lets out, purple loosestrife kind of lets out Phragmites, but I still think they're good to use. It's good to use, especially with public perception, local indigenous species that optimizes wildlife habitat. You throw some things in, I'll show you some pictures later, of two wetlands. One was very carefully planted, the other one a little farther away, they just left it. And plants colonized the other one just as well as not planting. So things will grow, sort of when they want to and where they want to. But you do want to optimize the physical heterogeneity of the system. You want to create some temporal variations in flow. Maybe you can use multiple cells where there are different plants in each cell, or algae in different cells. And that also helps you to plan for sediment accumulation. Another couple of pictures. So the top left is a picture of a wetland system. You see some of the duckweed over towards the left, but this is a system where the water is going through gravel, and so you don't have standing water. And the bottom one, you do have some standing water at periods, but right now the wetland is dry. So that's the vegetation. In terms of what the basin, what your wetland area looks like, you want to allow a variety of depths because then you can do different, you could treat different things. If you have deep water, that allows for denitrification. So nitrogen coming in will go out as nitrogen gas into the atmosphere. It'll also increase sediment retention, which makes sense, right? Shallow, this allows for more soil-water interactions, and you have emergent vegetation that can go in here. And then you can have series of cells, so that you have a deep one, a shallow one, a deep one, a shallow one, one that has no standing water at all. Some of the things you have to take into consideration: chemical loading, so important nutrients and other chemicals, things like iron, selenium, substrates and soils. Organic matter, remember, is really important for cation exchange. So if you're trying to take, for example, magnesium out, then you need to have really clayey kind of stuff. The texture is important, and that will help you also to determine whether it is subsurface flow, overflow, whatever it is. And then vegetation. There aren't a lot of plants that thrive in constantly high nutrient conditions. This is why, despite what some people would say, I think Phragmites is a great thing to plant in a constructed wetland. Typha, so cattail, Scypus, Inocornia, those sorts of things will grow in high nutrient conditions. In terms of the flow regime, so this is the same thing, basin morphology, but we're looking at cross-section now. Surface flow, it's easier, but it requires a lot more area, and it can be more temporally and spatially variable. B is subsurface flow. This is saturated, so therefore it's largely anaerobic. So anaerobic things that are going on. Remember, we talked about denitrification, ammonification of the microbes. The plants are doing some, but the microbes are doing a lot when you have subsurface flow. And then here you at the bottom, you have subsurface flow unsaturated. So you have this sort of horizontal trickling filter, and you can have both anaerobic and aerobic in this situation. So just because it's unsaturated doesn't mean it's not very powerful. So I'll show you a couple of blow-ups of these. Here is our favorite, typhus, right, cattails. And this is surface flow. So surface flow is going through. Some of the sediment is settling down to the bottom, and sorry, my dog is having a nightmare, evidently. Cassie? Sorry. Having a nightmare. Too much fun today. She came out in the wetlands with us. So this is subsurface flow of a constructed wetland. You see that there's a base layer where the water can't really go through. The water will come in, and the cattails will treat it. Another one that is subsurface flow. This is saturated as well. So you have the inflow. You have a lot of sand, and then you put a liner there. Yes, fish do love duckweed. I love duckweed. Duckweed is just such a happy plant, Joe. Such a happy plant. I don't know. It's such a pretty green color. So subsurface flow, now you have a gradient here, and what you're seeing is that you have the slotted pipe. So that's what you would get in a wastewater, in a septic system rather. And the water trickles in through the stone. There's a stone right there. The water goes through the subsurface, and you have the plant taking up the whatever it is that you're treating. Another one, here you have gravel, subsurface flow, so it's standing water, and it will look like gravel at the top, but with some plants coming out of it. So now I think we have the cell layout. Yeah. So if you have a small amount of area, so you don't have just endless amount of space to put in a huge wetland, then these are alternative flow diagrams for constructed wetland. So in this case, you have in A, water's coming through, but you keep recycling it. And you can set the valve. So remember I said that it's ideal to have 6 to 10 days the water's in this wetland. So you set the valve so the water recycles for 10 days, or as long as you can keep it in there. And then you switch the valve, and the outflow goes out once you feel like the water's been treated. B, you would do this to prevent any sort of toxic load. This is called step feed with recycle. So the water's coming in, and then you have individual pipes that are slotted, and so you don't have just one shock load, and it will go through for as long as you want it to, and then it will go out the outflow when you change the valve. C is step feed with recycle and a wraparound pond. So that's really getting the water through as many times as you possibly can. The inflow and the outflow are in the same place in this case, rather than inflow, then outflow on the other side. And then D is called a peripheral feed and center draw off. So it's coming in from all sides, and then you would either inject it into the subsurface if it's you know, something that you're just trying to treat a little bit and then get it into the subsurface. You would do this in a wastewater treatment plant, a human-based, wastewater treatment plant where you're injecting because you don't have a surface water body to discharge it into. So those inflows and outflows, this is a picture of it, just stone, and you would put down some stone at the bottom if it's not too permeable. If it's too permeable, the water just goes in, you channel it in, and then in the background there you have water. So this is surface feed, surface flow. The next one is surface feed. So you have the pipe there, right? And it's slotted, so the water's coming out of it all along that thing, and it's unsaturated subsurface flow. So if you're walking around on here, it would be totally dry. So the pollutants that we're looking at, sediments, when you're looking at these things, sediments, you have to deal with the sediment accumulation rate that will dictate. Yeah.
Jen?
Sure, of course, yeah. Anyone who has questions, please stop me.
Yeah. Do you mind moving a couple of slides
Thing.
back? The one before this.
This
yeah,
one?
right here. So, no.
Okay,
The one after
yep.
this. Yeah. So for the first one, you said we use it when we have very little space. But I was wondering if you recycle that water, there's already very little space in that wetland. So the recycled water would just add to the water that's already coming in. So wouldn't that kind of...
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So it would be, say you have concentrating animal feeding operation, and you have a lagoon that has filled up. So you have the cows, I'm sorry, I'm gesturing off the thing. You have the cows, and their excrement is going into a lagoon, and it's filling up. Then you'd want to dump it into the wetland that you're creating. So you have a one-time load of this material, and you cycle it around. And while it's cycling it around, the lagoon that's now empty is filling up with the animal excrement. And when that's full, you let the water go downstream, and you fill this up again. So it's a good question, and this wouldn't be for anything where you have a constant source of water. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so forward. Excuse me. So sediments, again, themselves are a pollutant. They starve the water of oxygen, and that is also where a lot of the heavy metals, the bacteria, viruses, 98% of bacteria and viruses in polluted water are stuck to the sediments. So when you remove the sediments by allowing them to settle to the bottom of the constructed wetland, you're removing virtually all of these pathogens. So if you're removing a lot of sediment, you want really deep stuff. Nitrogen, there are two removal mechanisms. First of all, the burial of organic nitrogen. That's the first mechanism. So when the plants die, the plants will lock it into the geologic rock record, essentially. In that case, you want to maximize plant growth and sediment accumulation. And then also denitrification, which is in anaerobic zones where you have feed and flow that are desirable. So this would be for animal feedlots, initial nitrification. You might want to have all sorts of aerated flow. And phosphorus, the primary removal mechanism for phosphorus, you may remember this, is the burial of organic material into the rock record and also sorption onto oxic soil. So the way to get rid of phosphorus is to just let the sediment accumulate in the wetland. Vectors and pathogens. So bacteria, already said that, right? You get rid of the sediment, you get rid of the bacteria and viruses. But also mosquitoes. Mosquitoes can, as you know, if you live in a temperate or even tropical region, will breed anywhere that there's standing water. So for that reason, you do want to minimize stagnant water in your constructed wetland. Or you can use gambusia, I think it's called a mosquito fish. You can actually stock your wetland with natural predators of the mosquitoes so that you can have the mosquito populations cut down if you need to have stagnant water. And you need stagnant water in order to have the sediment accumulate, but then you can have mosquitoes too. So I won't talk about this. This is essentially a little more detail about what site causes these things to be removed from the water. BOD5 is biochemical or biological oxygen demand. So it's the biological test for organic matter removing oxygen. So it's just the oxygen demand. This is how you get rid of the things that we just talked about. This is a conceptual model of phosphorus retention. So you can see that you have the algae and the microbes that are there, and you have the plants, you have the soil absorption, but the primary pathway by which phosphorus gets out of the treated water or the untreated water is to be accumulated in the peat. So someone explain this to me. This is from a study by geographic region. Why does it look like this? So on the x-axis, you have the country or state, and on the y-axis, you have annual nutrient uptake. Oh, Marissa, I see your question now too. Yeah, absolutely, Jim. Yeah, growing season and primary productivity. So this shows that you're not going to do a great job treating materials, water, polluted water in northern Canada or in Sweden, right? So, right, Florida is a great place to do this. So, Marissa, the best thing for removing pesticides, that's I guess you would hope. It's tough because anything with a side at the end is a killer, right? So if you're taking high-level pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, those sorts of things, they're going to kill the plants that are in there. So what you would want, I guess, is to have just some really, really hardy plants like Phragmites or something, and a very deep cell, because these organophosphates, which are the pesticides, aren't broken down really easily. So I'm sort of tripping over my words because I'm trying to think of a constructed wetland that was designed to do that. And yeah, I can't really come up with one. So that's a tough thing. It's a good question, and it's a tough thing. Yeah, good. I'm glad you're stumped too. Yeah, there are only some things that you can treat, and I find it interesting that you can treat acid mine drainage, that you can get the pH up, that you can get the sulfate out, because plants don't use a lot of sulfate. Once when I was in graduate school, my PhD advisor came to me and said, I just read a paper that said that constructed wetlands can take out iron. So design an experiment to see if we can do this. And it was like, come on, this has nothing to do with my PhD research, but okay. So I went down to the shop in the basement, and I asked Phil for some iron filings, and we put them through. I sort of did a constructed wetland in the lab and put iron filings in it, and tried to get iron-rich water, and didn't work. So I think different things work under different conditions, and that didn't work in Syracuse, New York, not at all. Okay, so sorry, I'm trying to go through these a little bit quickly. This is nitrogen removal, and the x-axis here is total biomass. So what you can see is that the more plants there are, essentially, the more nitrogen is removed. That should make intuitive sense, right? Here is phosphorus loading. And so this is an interesting thing because it shows essentially a breakthrough curve. And you have the input loading rate and the output concentration. So what this graph tells you is that up to about 5 grams per meter square per year, the wetland is able to handle it. But when you overload the system, you essentially get in what you put out or more. So you have to be really careful not to overload your system. So some other examples. Let's see what slide we're on. Let me see. Okay. So here's a picture of stormwater treatment wetland, and this is from your book. And what you can see is that the stormwater is coming in. There's sediment in it. There could be some metals. It goes into a wet pond, and you have this bench, it's called. So there's shallow along the edge and then really deep in the middle, and that will cause the sediment to accumulate. Then you have a plunge pool, and the purpose of the plunge pool is to get aeration into it. You have the spillway, so it would look like a slide, essentially a water slide. And then you have a big marsh. You have high marsh, so that means that the water is not standing. So if it could feel a little bit swampy, but it's essentially subsurface flow. And then you have marsh, so there's a little bit of surface water. Then you have micro pool, another plunge pool again, and the water comes out of that. So that's one setup. This is for agricultural runoff, and this is an actual one. You could see the Great Miami River there. And so what you see is the elevation. So those lines are topographic lines. The wetland boundary is the dark line. Let me see if I can get my little there. So this is the wetland boundary line right here. And the things that are labeled W2, W3, these are just monitoring wells to see how well the wetland is doing its job. And then these are water level recorders, so just little piezometers to see what the level is. And then there are, these things here, these are rain gauges. And anything that is in blue, so the river, and then also this is standing surface water. And then there's some auto samplers in here. These are just trees and shrubs. So you have unsaturated and then saturated. Another example, this is, let me move the arrow out. Oh, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Ah. So this is the Houghton Lake treatment, and this is an interesting picture. This is from your book, too. So what they were doing is putting treated sewage into the peatland, and it's been applied there since 1978. And what you see is that the peatland is there, and it is being visually impacted. So 20 years later, it is in decline. So the point to this is, and we'll see this for those of you who are local and are going to the Ponkapog Bog, remember this slide, or I'll remind you of this slide. Peatlands are really bad things to use as treatment wetlands because they are so, obviously, right, they're so nutrient poor, so that when you start putting nutrients into them, you're going to have problems. Here's a graph of the visually affected zone. The top one shows the hectares. The next one is dissolved inorganic nitrogen in versus out. And you see that the dissolved in is the diamond, and you have 15 milligrams phosphorus per liter at a max. The out is none. So it is doing a good job taking the nitrogen out. The bottom, total phosphorus, 5 milligrams per liter going in maximum, and out nothing. So it's doing a great job at taking out the nutrients, but it's at a cost because it is being impaired, and eventually it will kind of go away. This one's cool too. This is acid mine drainage, and this is a treatment wetland in Ohio, so this is actually going on. So you have in, let's see, the little arrow again. So this is just a blow up of what's going on in the Lick Run River, which goes out to the Hocking River. So it's just a blow up. It's not that it's next to it. So you have the inflow, and acid mine drainage, again, low pH, nitrogen, selenium, metal, all those sorts of things. You have hay bales that serve as dikes, so the water is essentially going back and forth like a maze through this. It comes back and back and back and forth all the way through here, and then you have ones going north-south here, and then you have not standing water anymore. You have these pipes going into the subsurface, and that reduces sulfate in this, and then it eventually goes out of the stream. Out of the stream. So that's just going on here. It's coming out. Acid mine drainage. It's coming out of here. You have a treatment wetland, and what you can see in the result is that the inflow. So this is, again, the acid mine drainage in Ohio. This is total iron. You can see the inflow going into the wetland is pretty high. It goes up to, so this is pre-construction and post-construction. So it kind of came down a little just naturally. Maybe there's less coal there anyway. But it was up to almost 280 milligrams per liter, and then went down to 200 and maybe 45. That's the inflow before it hits the wetland. The wetland, once it was created, the outflow brought it down to below 50, which is really cool. And then the stream leaving the site, it was a little bit further reduced to near zero for iron. So kind of neat. This is the Olentangy River Wetland Research Park. This is at Ohio State University. They have 2 kidney-shaped experimental wetlands that are here. And what they did was to, the next slide, to have one side of them be planted. So they put in plants, and then the next side, again, this is what I said before, they just left it alone, and it naturally populated. And what you see is that regardless of whether you carefully and painstakingly plant all sorts of native species and that kind of thing, or you just leave it alone, make a shallow pond essentially, and let it populate with whatever's in the area, it does the same job at reducing nitrogen and reducing phosphorus for regardless of what you do. So This is a sad, I hate these things, concentrated animal feeding operations. You see to the right, there are cow barns. And Nandini, this is when you're asking, oh, sorry, Nandini, I didn't see your question. Good question. It's getting converted to a fen. So grasses are starting to go in there, and the species diversity would go up, but now you don't have the rare species of the peatland. So yeah, if you have questions and I don't get to them, just unmute, yell. So yeah, no problem. So the cow barns are there, and they're taking the waste from the cows and putting them into these anaerobic lagoons, and then they have the wetland cells further off to the left. So you have all those cows in those barns, and you're treating the animal sewage on this. They can be pretty effective up to a point, although it is the case that you can overload the wetland systems, and then it goes into the reservoir, and then they inject it subsurface, inject. So talking about how you manage these, you should manage them by removing plants several times a year. What that does is to increase the nutrient and chemical removal, and it can stimulate growth. So you don't dredge it and take them all away. You just take away some several times a year. Mosquito control, really important if you're doing a constructed wetland that has standing water and there's not a flow. You can use mosquito fish, which are Gambusia finis, I think they are, and you can also use bacterial insecticides. So Bacillus, the same thing, Bacillus thuringiensis, that is, I was just teaching about this in Eating in the Environment. We use that for genetically modified organisms for cows. George, you know, Bacillus. So that's a bacteria that naturally kills the mosquitoes. So it's not that you're putting in a chemical. So then pathogen transmission, if there is bacteria or viruses that are coming from municipal water, you should do some sort of chlorination to make sure that those things are dead before they're going into potentially someone else's drinking water. And then surface flow, it increases wildlife. It may help in land building, so management is important. As you know, we're always concerned with cost. You guys aren't necessarily concerned with cost when you're making yours. But it turns out that the cost per hectare decreases as the size of the wetland increases. And I think I have a graph on this. So if you have $200,000 per hectare for 1 hectare, it will go down to $60,000 per hectare for a 10-hectare wetland, and it can go down to 20,000 if you have 100 hectares. I don't know who would do a 100-hectare treatment wetland, but you could. Again, generally cheaper than chemical treatment plants, depending on which geographic region you are. They also release a lot less carbon dioxide than chemical treatment. Yeah, I don't know if there's a primary one. You would populate it with ones that you want, but whatever gets established would be based on, so this is in reference to George's question, would be based on what your setup was, right? So you know that different bacteria live at different depths in wetland environments, and that's just what's going to happen. It's the same thing with the plants. So you can try to populate things, and I teach about that when I teach groundwater geochemistry. The in situ treatment of polluted groundwater, people do a huge amount of work trying to get the bacteria to populate. Then you have to add nitrate, you have to bubble it, you have to do all sorts of things. So it's really expensive if you're trying to control what kind of bacteria are in water treatment plants and wastewater or wetlands. So this next picture is one that shows the construction cost per hectare of the wetland size, the wetland size. This is based on data of constructed wetlands that are in your book. I think it's table 20 or 19.8. The dotted lines show a 95% confidence interval. And what does this show? Yeah, sure, George. So what does this show? Anyone? It just shows, because this is a log scale, so the, yeah, I see people typing. It's log, so if you made it arithmetic, it would be a much greater slope. Yep. Everyone, yes. Speaking of that, why don't we, I'll put a couple of polls up so you guys can